And happy Father's Day to all your dads. Yours is an irreplaceable role in the life of your kids, and we honor you this day. Thanks for being here for worship. A few weeks ago, I watched as Marguerite Hawkins and Evelyn White on video replaced their moms in worship service so that their moms could enjoy Mother's Day. Remember that? It was really, really sweet and really good. And I thought, hey, I got a daughter, and I wouldn't mind sitting out Father's Day, and my daughter's going to be in town. And she turns out to be an ordained EPC pastor, and really one of the best communicators I know. Rachel is the Dean of Spiritual Formation at Montreat College, a really great Christian school back in North Carolina, and she is the first reason that I get to be a father. I get to celebrate Father's Day. It is my real honor and delight to welcome to our pulpit the Reverend and almost the Reverend Dr. Rachel Toon. Would you welcome her back home?
Thanks, Dad. Happy Father's Day, Dad.
Thank you, baby.
When he plays the Father's Day card, what are you going to do? All right, guess I'm preaching then. But I actually really do love to be with you all. I have not only a great biological dad, but Chapel Hill gave me a lot of really great spiritual dads. And you really need both to grow up in life with God. So shout out to all you spiritual dads out there too. You're doing a really good thing. Especially you, Papa Sauce. I'm looking at you. Front row. Speaking of said spiritual dads, they have varying degrees of actual, senses of responsibility. And I'll show you what I mean. So back when I was a freshman in high school, I had a youth leader who's also a Chapel Hill elder, who shall remain nameless, who knew how to make homemade fireworks. And I found this very intriguing. And so I did a little research and a supply run, and I got myself a 2-liter water bottle and some crystal Drano. And that is not the entirety of the recipe for those of you taking notes. My poor Uncle Dan wouldn't survive if I gave you all instructions on this. So do not try this at home. And so I persuaded said elder to, change up our Bible study a little bit and spiritually form me in some other life skills. And said leader agreed to that suggestion. And so naturally, we decided to test our experiments in the most spacious and suitable place to do that, which would be the church parking lot. And we also, for some reason, maybe because it was less visible, but chose to do it in a particular location on the back here, right, where the road comes down, which is incidentally right underneath Dad's office, if you know where that is. And so, as it turns out, I would have made a pretty good contribution to the Army. I'm pretty good at making things explode. In fact, perhaps a little bit too naturally gifted, because what was supposed to be a nice little gentle pop was an earth-shattering, window-shaking bang that literally stained the asphalt for years. I think they've paved it over, but go look and see if it's still there. You could see the crater that it left. And so, blessedly, we at least had the wisdom to do this on a Friday, when, as you may know, the church offices are closed. So there was not supposed to be anybody around to call the SWAT team. Except, who knew? Someone had forgotten something in his office and decided to go get it that day. And so, pop goes the firework in an explosion that made the Hindenburg sound like pop rocks, and Dad came tearing down the stairs out the side door and immediately assessed the nature of the situation with guilty 15-year-old and guilty church elder, both holding crystal Drano, and he identifies what has in fact taken place, and in great vexation shouts, "What on earth were you thinking? How could you possibly try this without me?" You're not even surprised, are you? Yeah. But sometimes dads surprise us, don't they? And this morning we're going to dive into what is quite possibly the most famous dad story in the Western world. And this dad is never going to respond the way that you expect him to. But before we get to it, I do want you to kind of keep 2 questions in the back of your mind, and it's this. Who is this story really about, and who is it really for? Who is the story really about, and who is it really for? Because the answer is probably not what you expect. It might surprise you, and it might have something to say to you. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 15, and that starts out with Jesus doing his very Jesus-y thing, which is him hanging out with all the wrong people and putting all of the right people in a tizzy. And so we're in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and scribes muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And then Jesus told them this parable. So Jesus proceeds to tell the three great lost and found stories. And you've maybe heard them before. The first is the story of the lost sheep. The shepherd loses the sheep. He treks all throughout the backcountry to find it, and when he gets back home, throws a big party to celebrate with all his neighbors. And then there's the story of the lost coin, where the woman somehow misplaces a significant percentage of her retirement. She turns her house upside down until she finds it, and she's so excited that she throws a big party for all her neighbors to celebrate. And then we get to the last of the lost and found stories. But this one has a few more plot twists. And it starts like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. And not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. It's possible that you've heard this story before if you've been exposed to the church for any period of time. So this might be something that has become familiar to you. But you know the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. So maybe let's just try to listen to it with new ears. So let's try it this way. So once upon a time, there was a successful businessman, very well respected in his community, and he had 2 sons. And his relationship with his kids was complicated. And the younger one, see, he's especially mouthy. And so he came to Dad one day and said, "Dad, all that money I'm supposed to get when you die, I want it now, so I can live my best life right now without you having to be in it." And instead of responding not only how we would think he would respond, but how we feel he should respond, namely, "I ain't dead, it ain't yours, and until you wipe your entitled smirk off your face, you can't buy a bag of Doritos with my money." That is not, in fact, what happens. In fact, the father does something that probably goes against every parenting book ever written. He goes to the bank, he immediately liquidates half of his company's assets and cuts a check, millions of dollars, gives it to him on the spot. And the next day, the son takes the first flight out to Vegas, and you can use your imagination. Okay, it didn't take him long to blow through all of that money on slot machines and casinos and girls and drugs, but right around the time he spent the very last dollar that he had, a world pandemic hit and the economy crashed. And all of a sudden, all his party buddies were a little less friendly, and things got really bad really fast. His desperation hit just as quickly as his extravagant wealth. And things got so bad that he ended up running drugs for the dealer who used to supply him. And he got so hungry that he wanted to eat out of the dumpsters he was doing business behind. Reality came for him with a vengeance. And this is what happened next. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Over this last Memorial Day weekend that just happened, I set out with a couple friends to hike the Art Loeb Trail. It's one of the more challenging hikes in the Appalachian Mountains. Anybody know what that is? Any East Coast people who know what I'm talking about? Not a lot. Havens, I know you've been around the East Coast enough. You should know this. Yeah, right. Not enough East Coasters out there. That's okay. So here's what you need to understand about hard hikes, challenging hikes in the Appalachians or any of the East Coast range. And before you get too judgy and condescending of East Coast mountains, because West Coast people do that, Rainier. Yeah, Rainier's awesome. Obviously, I know that. Okay, I'm from here. The Rockies, yes, they're amazing. But you need to understand something. The Appalachians know they're not nearly as tall or as impressive as Rainier and the Rockies. They're geriatric, they're old, And they're very insecure about it. So they take it out on you in different ways. So this 31-mile hike in 2 days, over the course of it, we were going to climb an estimated 7,000 feet, but we're only going to finish less than 1,000 feet higher than we started. And if you can't do math in your head, which I cannot do, that just means we did this all day, all pain with no reward. That's hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, okay? And so that was the first factor, the first variable. The next variable was the weather. May is usually magnificent in western North Carolina. Spring and early summer is just gorgeous. But of course, for some reason, this Memorial Day, we had the forecast of thunderstorms and freezing rain, which isn't even supposed to be a thing. Those things don't even usually go together. But lo and behold. And yet, for crying out loud, I'm a Northwestern girl, right? We don't hike in the rain, we don't hike. So I'm like, no big deal. But then there was an additional factor that we didn't fully consider. And that all three of us were in our 30s. I'm the baby, I'm 30. And I've discovered something, that when you turn 30, everything in your body starts trying to die on you. It's most distressing. And you can't just sort of pop up and hike 31 miles in 2 days with no ill effect. I found that to be quite alarming and quite troubling, and my feet still hurt. It's been like a month now. And so those were all the circumstances at play, and we ended up also, our math was not good, our timing was not good, everything went wrong, and we were still miles from the end at 9:30 at night. We're hiking in the dark, in the torrential rain, in profound pain because we have all overestimated our abilities. And it was at some point in this window of time where a thought came into my mind. And I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe this wasn't a very good idea. Maybe this was not a good idea. So I am deeply sympathetic to the younger brother in this moment, because that is the moment he has just had. You know what? This was not a great plan. This is not turning out how I thought it was going to turn out. And the literal Greek in this passage is very, very interesting. So our English translations, they read when he came to his senses, which is a very good translation into our language of that, the sense of that expression. But what the Greek literally says is the younger son came to himself. He came to himself. Because this whole time, he's actually been lost from himself, hasn't he? And before he can deal with any other relationship in his life, he's going to have to deal with that. So he comes to himself. He comes up with a plan. He's going to go and ask Dad if he can come on as his minimum wage hired employees. Just come in at entry level, and then he starts practicing his speech. And I think there's something else really worth noticing in these verses. As you read kind of through his speech, did you notice the younger son's motives for going home? They're not great. If you're honest, if you actually read it, they're not actually particularly inspiring. At the very best, they start from a point of pragmatism. I am starving here. I will not be if I eat humble pie and just go home. That option is better than this option. It's not, I hurt Dad's feelings, I feel bad, and I want to make it up to him. Now, I think the story gives us reason to believe that he comes to that place eventually, but that is not where he starts, or anywhere close. He's got some pretty shady motives. And that is really, really good news for us, because with all his shady motives, with all his twisted, complicated motives, he got to go home. And with all our shady motives, we can go home too. All right, we can go back to the Father, even though we are not the people internally that we want to be. So not only is he uninterested in cleaning up your act before you come home, he's equally uninterested in you cleaning out your heart before you come home. Because, he could sort that out later. That's his job. And because in the Bible, repentance is not fundamentally an emotion, it is an action. And it starts with a very simple reality check. I think the Bible's a lot more pragmatic than we tend to give it credit for. It starts with the reality check of what I'm doing with my life right now is not working. So I'm going to try something else and give the Father a chance. And the chance is all he needs, because this is what happens next. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he is found.' So they began to celebrate." Now, we just prayed the Lord's Prayer in our prayers, in our time of prayer. And Jesus teaches us in that prayer to address God a very particular way, to address him as Abba, which Abba meaning dad, right? It is the affectionate, intimate name for a child's relationship to a father. And for a lot of people in this room, that's a pretty loaded word, huh? Dad can be kind of a complicated sort of thing. And Father's Day can be a complicated sort of a day. Because maybe you had a dad who walked out, or who was abusive, or who is an addict, or maybe he was distant or critical. And if your earthly father's any of those things, it can be real hard not to imagine that your heavenly Father is any of those things. That he acts the same way as your experience with your earthly dad. And on top of all of that, even for those of us who have the most loving and attentive and invested dads, they are still sinful, broken human beings. They're just human. They need Jesus too. And so Jesus gets this. He gets that the word Father is really important and really loaded. So he's going to go to great lengths to define for us what he wants us to think about when he uses that word. And he does so in this story. He wants us to understand the kind of father that Yahweh, the God of Israel, really is. He's the kind of dad who stands at the end of his driveway every day looking for you, even after you spit in his face and blew all of his money in Vegas. And he's the kind of dad who, when you do finally show up, cuts off your very half-hearted apology speech because it's not about the speech and it was never about the speech and he doesn't care. He's just really glad you're home. That's the kind of dad that God is. He's the one who wants to throw us a party when we came back. Now, if I was writing the story, this would be the end. And that would make sense, because if you look at the other parables in this section, that's how they end. Lost thing, found thing, throw a party. And that's where we're at here. Everybody's having a party. But Jesus is not done yet, because as it turns out, there's actually another person in this story that we need to hear from. So now we're at verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. Now, if you have not heard this story before, you would have totally forgotten that the older brother existed. Be honest. Maybe you've heard it and so you saw this coming, but if this was a new story for you, we would have totally forgotten about him. He sort of gets mentioned in verse 11. All we know is that the father had 2 sons. That's all we hear up until this point. And honestly, Big Brother's probably pretty used to being an afterthought in his family dynamic. Their whole lives, the youngest brother is always the eye of the family hurricane, the source of all the drama, the reason the dad couldn't sleep at night. And because the older brother is actually responsible and has a stable, productive life, he gets overlooked. Thank God the older one's fine, because the younger one never is. He knows this script. And he finally loses his ever-loving mind. He has had enough. The little brother broke his dad's heart. He probably damaged the family business irreparably, putting everyone at financial risk. I don't know anything about business, but I would imagine, for those of you who do, it is not a good idea to just sell half of everything in one day. This probably doesn't go well. And so who knows the financial jeopardy that everybody is now in? And after all the chaos that the youngest has left in his wake because of all of his stupid, selfish decisions, he gets a freaking party? Are you kidding me? And nobody even bothered to text the older brother to tell him it was happening? What is this? Now, again, if you've heard this story before, it could be tempting to pick on the older brother. That self-righteous, stuck-up stick in the mud, what's his problem? Doesn't he want to go in and have a good time? And the older brother's going to be drawn in. There's something to be learned from him. But the thing is, to jump in too quickly to pick on big brother actually misses the point. Because a parable does what all great stories do. They're supposed to invite you in, bring you inside the story. It's supposed to teach you empathy, and perhaps even come to yourself. So before you get too judgy, can you get a feel for who this guy is and why he is so angry? And once you get there, once you can maybe get inside his head and his heart, then we'll go to the next thing. Now, this brother really is, bless his heart, in the mildly condescending Southern sense. He is the stereotypical older brother. So he is going to stick it to his dad with a lot less drama and a lot less fuss, but he's going to stick it to him nonetheless. And once again, dad is going to surprise us with how he responds. So now we are in verse 28. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I can celebrate with my friends. Where's my dang goat? But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed a fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Now, I would argue that these verses are the punchline, not just of the prodigal son story, but of all three of the parables in Luke chapter 15, which means we need to revisit something really, really important. Who is Jesus talking to? Who is this story about? Did you catch it? Verse 1. "But the Pharisees and scribes muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.' Then Jesus told them this parable." So the whole reason we have one of the most beloved stories in Christianity is because Jesus is responding to the Pharisees. This story is for them. And I know that you've probably been talking a lot about the Pharisees since you're kind of traipsing your way through Luke. The Pharisees and the scribes, those are kind of the sidekicks they roll together. And they are Jesus' bitterest enemies. They are the source of his harshest words and the biggest conflicts. They are acutely responsible for his execution. And did you also know that Jesus had way more in common with the Pharisees than any other denomination, if you will, in ancient Palestine? By far. They were by far the most theologically and doctrinally similar. They both believed in the resurrection. They believed in life after death. They believed in the spiritual realm of angels and demons and all these other things. They also both had a deep love and passion for the Old Testament. Jesus shared this with the Pharisees. And I suspect that part of why they frustrated him so much is that these were the guys who should have known God the best. And they didn't know him at all. They didn't know him at all. Because when the older brother looks at his dad, he does not see a tender and extravagantly generous parent. He sees a stingy old miser. He sees a sucker who he holds in just complete contempt. And while the older brother has had constant physical proximity to the father, right, they work together every day, we discover that, in fact, at least emotionally and relationally, he too is in the far country. He is also estranged from the father. But his estrangement is more dangerous simply because it's less obvious. It's the simmering resentment that slowly corrodes the soul, as opposed to the flagrant debauchery that sort of wrecks everything in a blaze of glory. And yet, it's the father's response to the oldest son, to the Pharisees, that is the punchline of the whole story. So let's read it again. "My son," the father said, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So there's one more nerdy Greek fact I really want us to talk about, and I think it's important. is in our English Bibles, the father addresses this oldest brother as my son. But the Greek word is actually, it's not the normal word that we would use for son, which would be weos in kind of normal context. It's a very specific word. It's the word teknon. Everyone say teknon. Budding Greek scholars already. Look at you go. And so the closest we could get in English would be child, but that doesn't really work because the word teknon has a very certain specific context, and it is a term of affection and endearment used to address an adult male child. You tracking with that? We don't really have a word for that in English, which says something very interesting about our culture, doesn't it? Teknon is the word of affection and endearment addressed to an adult male beloved child. And here's the point. Notice the tone the father takes with the oldest. Notice the tone that God uses to address the Pharisees. My dear child, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we got to celebrate. Your brother was dead and he's alive. He was lost and we got him back. We got to have a party. You can come too, if you want. Jesus ends this story with an unspoken invitation and a cliffhanger. We don't know how the oldest responds. The oldest brother is invited to the father's party too, but is he going to go? The younger brother had to overcome the obstacle of shame, and now the oldest brother has to overcome the obstacle of pride. What is he going to choose? As a sidebar, I have a sneaking suspicion, right? So Luke is the writer of this passage, or who's documenting it, who also writes Acts, who is the traveling companion of Paul. I can't help but wonder if Luke has the Apostle Paul in mind when he writes this, the older brother who did, in fact, go into the party. But that's beside the point. But here is the good news of the gospel. The father is throwing a giant party, and he wants all of his kids to be there, no exceptions. He wants them all there, every single one. The rebels and the rule followers, the Enneagram 7s and the Enneagram 1s. My college students love that. The slackers and the overachievers, the selfish and the resentful. You're all invited. In fact, he's actually begging you to come, and he gave up far more than liquidated assets so that you could go. He gave up his own beloved teknon, his own beloved son. So here are some invitations for you, and the first one's for everybody. I would invite you just to spend some time this week in this passage and alone with the Lord and ask him who you are in this story at this moment in your life. Bear in mind, it will probably change depending on the season of your life. It often does. But in this moment, in this season, in this week, who are you in this story? Ask the Spirit to help you come to yourself and show you how you might respond when you do. So that's invitation number one. But also, today is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, dads. Shout out to you all. We love you and are so grateful for you. And obviously, I have never been a dad. It looks hard. And so I wanted to just offer a word of encouragement to you dads out there, because I'm willing to bet that just as this day can be really tough on kids who have very challenging relationships with their dads, as my college students will tell you, I would imagine it can also be hard on dads who have tough relationships with their kids. In fact, you may be a dad who kind of hates this day, actually, because it's just a reminder of all the ways that you have not been the father you wanted to be, and you're reminded of your failures and your shortcomings and your estranged relationships with your own children. So, for all the dads out there who have complicated relationships with their kids, know this: God does too. He does. We just read it. He knows all about having an estranged relationship with his children. And the story's not over yet for him. The story's not over yet for you either. And dads, know that you will never be the father you want to be without first being the teknon, the beloved child, the beloved son, in whom the father delights regardless of what he has or has not done. So if you are ready to repent, and repent in the sense of this story where you realize that your current setup is not working out how you want it to, is not going how you thought, and something needs to change. If you're at a point in your life, you're ready to say that, and I invite you to pray with me. Join me in prayer. Dad, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for all the ways that I live like the younger or the older brother. You can choose in your heart which one resonates most. Thanks for sending your own son to rescue me. And please help me know what it means to be your beloved child, and help me reflect that love to my own children this week. In the name of your matchless son, Jesus. Amen.